Democracy in Africa. We are joined from our Pretoria studios by political analyst Dr. Samadora Fukeni. Doctor, very good morning to you and welcome to AM News.
Good morning to you, Elvis, and good morning to your viewers.
First and foremostly, what do you make of what happened in Burkina Faso?
Well, it's a turning point in many ways because here is the case where you didn't have a political movement or even a political party organizing people, but yet the people's power seemed to have been able to overthrow a government well entrenched which has been in place for quite some time and of a strong man who was seen as being invincible. That then sends a very strong message to many other leaders who would want to change the constitution just to suit themselves and their fears.
Now, we've seen this happening in North Africa during the Arab Spring, where leaders were toppled after serving for a long time. Are we seeing the same sort of trend in West Africa, you think?
Yes, it may be uneven depending on how organized people might be, but it is the same trend. Remember that in 1989 to 1991 in Africa, and in many countries where there was one-party rule, there was personal rule or military rule, it was the people who protested and demanded multi-party democracy, and they succeeded in many ways. So this might just have triggered something that will not just end up with Burkina Faso.
Now, since the uprising in Burkina Faso, France, which happens to be Burkina Faso's former colonial master, has been very vocal in this issue. What do you think of France's intervention at this particular point in time? Or should they intervene?
Well, France has very strong interest in West Africa and in Central Africa in areas where they see them as being their spheres of influence and former colonies. So they would do anything, as we saw in Cameroon, as we saw in Côte d'Ivoire, as we saw in Mali. Even if it means military intervention, they would do just that. And in this case, they seem to be swaying with the popular mood in a sense of trying to make sure that they are on the right side.
Now, just to give us some background in the Burkina Faso situation, why is it that the people want the president out? Is it that he overstayed his welcome?
He overstayed his welcome, but going back into the 80s, also remember that he was a friend of Thomas Sankara, Captain Thomas Sankara, who was very popular, who introduced many changes and a revolution in Burkina Faso. And he turned against Thomas Sankara and killed him. So you might still have those things, plus the fact that he might have overstayed his welcome, that you do have people challenging him so directly.
Now, the African Union has also weighed in on the Burkina Faso issue, but some are criticizing the African Union for its lack of action when it comes to long-serving rulers, calling it a toothless bulldog. What do you make of the AU's role in the Burkina Faso situation and other similar cases?
Well, to the credit of the African Union, unlike the OAU, which just decided not to intervene in things which they viewed as being domestic, AU has been quite active in resolving conflicts and has taken a position that any overthrow of government or change of constitution to fit personal preferences, it would frown upon that. And as such, in this case of Burkina Faso, you see AU has weighed in, saying that they need a civilian transitional government so that the army does not usurp and hijack this popular uprising. And the army seemed to have yielded to that, in addition to the international voices which were calling for just that.
What do you think, Doctor, should be done to avoid all these uprisings that we've seen in Africa and in the past against these rulers that do not want to leave that hot seat?
Well, I do think that public discourse, public education, that leads to constitutionalism, so that people begin to see constitution as being somewhat sacred in a way, and as a foundation document that should not always be changed as and when some rulers feel comfortable or uncomfortable. And secondly, the AU has to tighten its own stance on this particular matter, together with the international community, and encourage succession planning. Because one of the things is that some leaders who have done wrong to the people, and some having looted resources, fear being tried, and therefore they cling on to power by all means necessary. So it is at all those levels that the AU and the people themselves should actually be intervening.
Is the AU strong enough to intervene?
AU currently is not strong enough to intervene. It depends very much on regional organizations like ECOWAS, SADC, and so forth. And it also depends on member states' willingness to intervene. And most member states intervene when their interest in their neighborhood is at stake. They generally are not generous with their intervention when those factors are not in their interest, in their geopolitical interest.
Now, the Burkinabe wants to rule their own country. Do you think that that is a reality in the foreseeable future?
It is a reality because with the transitional government, you will then have elections. And those elections mean that the voice of the people may begin to be reflected, even though some of the elections at times are manipulated. But again, we must learn from the Arab Spring in North Africa and in the Middle East that some of the popular anti-establishment sentiments without a formation or leadership can easily go astray, and many other forces can take advantage of that.
Doctor, as always, thank you so much for your time and joining us here on AM News.
My pleasure.
That was political activist, or analyst rather, Samadora Fokeni, joining us from our Pretoria studios. Well, that's your news for now. Kendall Makamate is standing by with your sports news.